Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Live Life with Sean. I'm your host, Sean Higgins. I'm a lifelong information security technology expert with a passion for speaking, coaching, and writing. In this podcast, I'm going to talk to you about what is going on in my life, and I hope that by me talking about it, it's going to help you with what's going on in your life. If you enjoy this content, please share it, subscribe to it, like it, share it, and or leave a comment or question, as this will help others find this podcast. And I thank you tonight for joining me. And tonight, I'm going to talk about surrender. And I think in coming up with the idea for this podcast, I needed to surrender because I was down a path of trying to come up with a topic for this podcast and had, down working through some notes, trying to figure out what to do, what to say, and it just wasn't coming together. So I just kind of sat here and said, what am I going to talk about tonight? And I remembered I was listening to Brene Brown, one of my favorite authors and podcast hosts, in her Dare to Lead podcast. And she was talking to Dr. Sarah Lewis about her book, The Rise: Creativity, the Gift of Failure, and the Search for Mastery. And one of the points they were talking about was the power of surrender. And as they were talking about it, they're talking about surrender as not about quitting or giving up, but instead of giving up, it's more about giving over or focusing on what you can control. And as I listened to them, and as I was preparing for this podcast, I started to think about terms that I might use in my life as I came up with examples. For me, letting go, just letting go of the control that I have over the situation and just going with it. Or jumping in. There have been some times in my life when I've just said, I'm just going to go with it and just see where it goes. And just trusting, I think, is a good word to put in there. As Sarah Lewis was talking, she gave the example of an Arctic explorer called Ben Saunders, who's been to both poles, the North and South Pole, on foot and alone. And he told her a story that, as he's heading towards the South Pole, he's on these shifting ice sheets. And, he's heading in a direction and sets up camp, and the next morning wakes up, checks his GPS, and overnight the ice sheet has moved. So he's basically back where he was the day before. And I think that would have driven me completely crazy. I probably would have gone out of my mind. But he learned to just control what he could control. He surrendered to it and said, okay, this is where I start today. Let me go. And just continued going and had good days and bad days like that, meaning sometimes the ice moved with him, sometimes the ice moved against him, but he was able to get to the South Pole. Brene was relating to this, and she talks about how she has to surrender for a book to come together. And she's written 8 or 9 books. And every time she says she tries going into a project to be more organized, more diligent, to have an outline written up, but in the end, just ends up surrendering, and then the book comes together for her. I can appreciate that. When I published my first book, I had written another book before that and didn't publish it for a number of reasons. But when I finally got into that space of I was going to write my book, it was really about surrendering for me. I mean, I didn't think about it at the time, but I just kind of felt like it's time to start. And I made a commitment that every Saturday and Sunday I would sit down and I would write. And I would write until I was done that day, usually an hour, maybe an hour and a half. it was easy for me because I would get up early and I would either go to my office or go to Starbucks, and I would just sit there. And I would take a deep breath and write whatever came through. Now, sometimes on, Saturday would typically be my exploration day, and Sundays would sometimes be going back and fine-tuning what I wrote on Saturday, but not much more than that space of what I was writing. And I kept this up, I think, for about 6 months. And at the end of those 6 months, I just felt that I was done. And I went back and looked over my writings for that past 6 months, and I put them together, weaved them, rewrote some stuff, added some things, but just kind of weaved them all together. And that became my first book, Living Your Purposeful Life. And you can find it on Amazon, short plug here. But that was really a big example of me surrendering to the process. And as I was sitting down and thinking about this show, because I've thought about talking about surrender, a number of times, some of the times that I really surrendered, when I learned how to read energy as a coach, that process started by going to a weekend event. And at that weekend event, met the teacher, and he was up there talking, and I'm going, oh, this is great. This is all this cool stuff he's talking about. Energy, I kind of knew, but I didn't know, but he's putting it all together. And then he goes, okay, turn to the person next to you and read their energy. I turned to the person next to me. I said 4 words. And we had 4 minutes, and I just laughed for the other 3 minutes and 58 seconds. Because I just was so stuck in my head, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing, that that's all I did. Thankfully, that was the last exercise we did that evening. This was a Friday night, and I was like, man, I don't know if I can come back on Saturday, man. I was awful. And I almost didn't come back on Saturday. I mean, I get up Saturday morning, my normal get up early, go for a walk. And I got the courage to go back. And on that second day, we started with something that was more relatable for me. David started talking about auras, and I had heard of auras, and I think I had felt them before because it's the energy boundary that surrounds you. So that was a concept that I understood. So he goes, okay, what I want you to do, pick a partner. So I picked somebody randomly in the room. What I want you to do is to clean their aura. And I'm like, my mind is clicking because I'm still in my head a bit, but I know about auras, and I reach out and I feel the aura and I start cleaning it. And I imagine it's like I'm cleaning glass, okay? Just walking around the person, just kind of rubbing the aura like I'm cleaning glass. Not really, just kind of getting into it. At the end of 4 minutes, the instructor goes, okay, good job, everybody. Now what I'd like you to do is to pull your energy back from their aura, because when you've cleaned it, you've left some energy there. And in my mind, I saw streaks on the aura. It just blew my mind. I didn't understand it, but I imagined pulling them back, and I said, okay, I'm in. At that point, I surrendered the rest of that weekend and just kind of let whatever happened happen. I mean, we were reading there's layers to the aura, and each layer has a different color. And I was reading one of the layers and I'm supposed to get a color, but I got a pumpkin. I have no idea how I got a pumpkin. But I was in this place of just, I thought I was just jumping in and letting go. But it felt like, as Brene and Sarah were talking, I just surrendered. And I talked about this pumpkin, and as I talked about it, the pumpkin had a smile on it. And I got that this person smile helped them become a great connector with people. I have no idea where it came from. Didn't really care, but I just went with it. And I really just jumped in. And throughout that whole program, that's what I did. And I had a great time. And there's been a lot of other examples where I could really say that I just jumped in and just surrendered to what's going on. And it was, and that's the process that I go through every Monday morning when I do my Kickstart Your Week podcast, is I basically sit down on Monday morning in a meditation, and I just sit and ask and allow, what do I need to bring through in my meditation that week? And I just sit and wait, and I'm open, and I usually get something. And sometimes it's little bits and pieces that I have no idea how are going to come together, but I get this feeling and I say, okay, I'm ready. And then as I sit down to do the meditation, I make sure that I'm ready. I surrender to it again and lean into the energy and lead the meditation where it feels it needs to go. And a lot of times the ideas that I got from that sitting in the morning, even, they're not the completed idea, but they get me started down the path. And I find this also works well in the work that I do. You know, there have been many times when I have had a report to do and have no idea what I'm going to write, and just let go of the outcome. I remember this time I was doing this major report for this client, and it was due at the end of the week, and I had a couple of weeks to write it. I'm collecting lots of data, looking at things this way, that way. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. It's due Friday. And I just sit down on Monday, and guess what? It flowed. It just popped out. I think I wrote most of it in a couple of hours, and then the rest of the week I just kind of picked at it and tweaked it and turned it, and Friday it was what it needed to be. There's a project that I recently started for a client, and it's in an area that I have no idea what I'm going to do. And part of this goes back to my boss who recently left. This would have been his sweet spot. He understood this stuff. He just, it was in his experience, in his wheelhouse. So I'm sitting, and this was actually last week, just trying to figure out what the heck am I going to do. I got 3 meetings with this client coming up, and I have no idea how it's going to go. I talked to my coworker. He's not really sure either. And I just felt into it. And then all of a sudden, a whole bunch of ideas started to flow through me. and I wrote them down. And with me, the way it works for me is it usually takes a couple of times. Sometimes I start with a blank piece of paper, scribble a bunch of stuff, and then it's like, okay, I have to put it aside. And usually it's like the next day I pick it back up and I get more clarity, more that wants to come through, more that fills in the blanks. And with this client, I had a bunch of stuff, and then we got into the first meeting, and I used what I had pulled in, but that started to lead to some other things, which I kind of put aside. The next morning, I again sat down with it and said, oh, let's take this. And I extended it some more. And that's the way it's been. And, you know, you just, for me, it is asking more questions, allowing, and just letting it flow through. And when it comes through, to just take whatever comes, and then when you're done with it, set it aside. And then pick it up again, and it will change again. I think I talked about when I created my garage door opener for the house here. It was an interesting process because I got a bunch of ideas and I sat down, and I think over a weekend I wrote it. I had to integrate some hardware with it. So I got it to work, and then I thought it was done, put it aside, and many weeks later, it was like, oh, wait a second, what about this? What if we did it this way? Or what if we added a sensor on the door to know if it was open or closed? And again, I would sit down for another weekend, and I actually probably rewrote the whole program from top to bottom because another idea flowed through me to come through. And I think I did that 3 or 4 times to get it to its current state. And it was funny, the last time I rewrote the whole thing, it totally changed how it communicated with the outside world. It went from one protocol to another. And it was funny because I like to monitor stuff to see what's going on. And the old network traffic was like this much traffic. The new network traffic is it's like a whole lot of traffic. New network traffic is very little. And it's just interesting because it just happened to come across an article that says, hey, Internet of Things, here's a special protocol. I'm like, let me go look at that protocol. Let me see if I can understand it. Oh, okay. What if I add that in? Man, that changed. First off, I had to learn how that protocol worked. But number 2, again, throughout the whole program, bring it back in, rewrite it from scratch. The other area that requires a bit of surrender for me is when I coach. Because for me, I do a lot of listening when I coach. And it's not only listening to what the person is saying, but it's also feeling into what is in the background, just underneath with this person. You know, is there something that's bubbling up? Is there something that is coming in for me that I need to ask them? And there's been some amazing things that have happened. just because I'm sitting listening to this person, and all of a sudden this question just nags me. It's just ask this, ask this. And I'm like, no, I don't want to ask that. Ask this, ask this. And I remember there was one coaching time when I was working with a good friend of mine, and we were talking, and this question was just kind of nagging at me. So we're almost ready to end our call. And this question came to me, and I had to ask her. And it just like broke the dam. It got us into a whole nother level of depth in our conversation, a whole nother area of worry that she had. But that, she was worried about what was going to happen this coming weekend, and this is like middle of the week, and I'm like, first off, a whole bunch of energy came at me because it just kind of, like I said, it opened a dam of a flood of emotions from her, a flood of information. I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I had surrendered to the idea of asking this question. And now I'm getting overloaded with this information from her. And I just had to just really breathe through it. And just be with her. It was only over the phone, man. I just wish I could sit across her and just hold her hand and just say, okay, it's gonna be okay. Let's work through this. Let's go through this. And we did. And it took us a little while. But it's those moments in coaching that just are really, when I was done with that call, I just sat there in awe of, again, this question just popped in my mind and said, you gotta ask her, gotta ask her. And I'm like, no, come on, we don't need to ask her. She seems to be doing great. No, you gotta ask her. And I asked her, and holy smokes. And I think it was good for both of us. For me, because I had to readjust what I was saying and doing. I had to readjust my attention to really be with her and how committed I was to helping her. And I'm hoping it was good for her. I think it was. She's an amazing person anyway. She's doing very well. So, yeah. So just take some time. And does this resonate with you? Have you ever just surrendered to something and something amazing came out of it? It may not even be what you thought it was going to be. I mean, when I sat down to write my book, all I had was a title. I had some work that I had done previously. There were 4 questions that I had done when I spoke about living your purposeful life. But that didn't really fill a book. And I just sat down each week and I didn't focus on the book per se. I just focused on the page right there. Has there been times in your life when you'd say you would have surrendered? And again, it's not about giving up, because I'm sure there's times you've given up. I mean, I've given up on stuff because I didn't think that it served me, and I probably gave up on some stuff just because I quit. I admit it, I quit some stuff, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad. Who knows? But just think about it. Are there things that you need to surrender to now? And there's probably, I'm not certain. As I was thinking about surrender, I've thought about, is there something I need to surrender to now? And it feels like there might be something coming down the pipe that I need to surrender to and just give into, but it just hasn't really shown up for me yet. Shown up with enough clarity to help me say, that's what I need to surrender to. I know there's another book I need to write, but it just doesn't feel like I'm there yet. It feels like there's more work for me to do to get there. And maybe surrendering is just me surrendering to keep doing this podcast until I can get to the point where it's ready for me to write the book. This is another level for me, is getting in here and doing this every week for you, for me. And we see where it goes. So thank you. I thank you for listening. I hope you're enjoying Live Life with Sean. I'm enjoying doing it, even though some days I'm not really sure what I'm going to talk about to you, but I hope it's helping you. If you'd like to talk to me about surrender or anything else, just go to my website at SeanCHiggins.com. Go to Connect with Sean page. Just fill out your information. We'll set up a time to talk. I look forward to it. I hope you have enjoyed this show. Please share it, subscribe to it, like it, and or leave a comment. This will help others find this podcast. Again, thank you for joining me tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it, and until next week, have a wonderful week.